Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. It has been a while. I'm excited to be back. I want to talk about the quilt festival that I recently participated in. I'll tell you about what quilts I sold, how much I made. Spoiler alert, it wasn't even close to as much as last year. This is the second year in a row that I've participated in this particular artist market festival, whatever you want to call it. And this year was not as great, but I will tell you about that. I want to show you 3 new quilts that I made. One of them back here, you may have remembered this from a couple months ago. I was working on it, I finished it. It's a queen size quilt, biggest quilt I've ever made. I did bring it to the artist market. It did not sell, obviously, because it's here, but it is now on my bed. And I will say that I've never had a quilt that I've made on my bed. I have on my bed, like Target blankets and things like that, which is a little bit sinful considering how many quilts I make. But now I'm keeping this one. Let's take a look at this quilt. I've scrolled back, as far as I can. We'll get a close-up look and I'll show you what the border is because the border's kind of tucked away back there, but I'm incredibly happy with how this turned out. I am actually going to do a little bit of additional hand quilting on it. It is machine quilted. I think in terms of design-wise, this is a very effective piece. I just played around with the materials. This is not based on a pattern, and it's a very easy block to make. It's also a very traditional block. So let's get a closer look at the border. So I have this, obviously, this black and white checkerboard here that this is all, pieced. I do have a little clip of how I pieced this, so I'll show that to you. Let me insert it right now and then we'll get back to this video. I'm attempting to create these strips of 3 rows of checkerboard. To do that, what I'm doing is taking strips, 2.5-inch strips of the dark and 2.5-inch strips of the light, and sewing them together to make this long strip. Now you may be wondering why I have 4 here when my rows are only 3 of the checkerboard. And what I do is I sew these together and I cut them into these 2.5-inch strips, just like this. When I've cut 3, because I have a dark on one side and a light on the other, I can flip them to be the direction that I want. I'll sew 3 strips together, and then that will be my row of 3. Just like this. And then I can attach that section onto this section. Obviously this will thin up a little bit with the seam allowance, but we'll go actually. See, this is why it's good to have the strips of 4, because you can see here that I don't want the black against the black, and this strip I made a little differently, and here it would be the black against the black. But because this was made out of strips of 4, I can rotate this one so that the cream is on the other side, and then I can match that up. So if I have this 4x3 strip, I can always turn it in the direction that I want it to be. Okay, so that's kind of how this piece here is created, and then it has these, double borders on either side, and this goes all the way around all 4 sides of the quilt. And then I have this awesome leafy print here with the gold, and the gold leaves here really complement some of the golds in these pieces here. Now these are actually 2 different fabric lines, and the reason these flowers are not straight up is because the quilt, as I have it hanging, is lengthwise instead of vertical, just because it was easier to hang that way. But the prints are not from the same line. This, I think, is an Adidas sitar, and this is like Moonlit Garden or Moonlight Garden or something like that. Here's the fish quilt. We'll talk about that in a second, but first I want to talk about the festival. And you guys did work on this quilt with me, which I love the top there, I'll just say. And the bottom is the same. Again, I really like this quilt very much. But let's talk about the festival for a second. So last year I had 2 really big sales. I sold my big enormous quilt, which was the equivalent, it was a little smaller than the one that I had up a minute ago, the checkerboard quilt, but it was kind of in the same design feel and almost the same size. And that one I had sold for $1,000. In addition, I had posted on Facebook that I was at this artist market and I'd shown some of my work, and one of my Facebook acquaintances emailed and said they wanted to buy a different quilt, another quilt. So I kind of, which was my second largest quilt, it was more artistic, and that one sold for, I can't remember exactly. You can go back and look, because I do have another video about this festival last year and how much I made in it that I had recorded at the time, but I don't remember what the video is called, something like how much did I sell my quilts for, something like that. But I talk about the exact numbers, so I can't remember how much I sold that second one for, but I think it was in the 800s. It was like 850 or 880 or something like that. So I didn't technically sell that quilt at the festival, but I sold it kind of in an indirect way. So I had those two huge sales, which totally covered, you know, the booth fee and my time and all that. I was very happy with that because the fee for this artist market is $420. It's pretty steep in my opinion. In addition, last year I sold a bunch of placemats, so I did great last year. This year, not so great. I did sell one quilt in the same way I sold it last year by posting on Facebook that I was gonna be there with some of the pictures of my things, and a good friend of mine contacted me and said they wanted to buy a quilt. So that, you know, good to go, sold that for $220. I think I had initially priced it at higher twos, like $275 or something, and then I did like a friends and family discount and sold that one. And then in addition, I sold I had made a bunch of pillows. Do you remember I'd made those dragonfly pillows? And then I'd also made a bunch of other pillows. And so I sold pillows, and then I also sold a bunch of placemats. I had made a ton of coasters, but I did not sell any coasters, so that was kind of a bummer. My placemats were priced at $55. I can't remember exactly how many sets I sold, but I want to say I sold about 6 or 7 sets this year. I think I sold more placemats this year than I did last year. In addition, on the final day, I decided that because I was not selling a lot of quilts, and every day I would decrease the pricing of the quilts. So for example, that checkerboard one that we just looked at, I had initially priced that at $1,000, which was, again, the same price that I had sold my large one last year. It didn't sell on the first day, so I bumped it down to $800. And then by the third day, because this was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, by the third day, I was like, I'm gonna price it at $700. I think it was $700, and I'm not going any lower than that because of the cost of the materials and the time and all that. I was like, that's the lowest, and if it doesn't sell, it's going on my bed. So we all know how that ended up. Where was I going with this? I have to think. Oh, so anyway, so every day I would decrease kind of some of the quilt amounts, but not lower than I would feel good about selling them for. You know, I always want to sell the quilts feeling good, that I've received a price that's fair, and that the customer also feels good about the price that they're purchasing the quilt at. By the last day, there were some quilts that I just did not want to bring home. And one of them was a dog quilt that, if you follow Darlene Michaud, she sometimes has these eBay auctions on some of her stash, or she used to. She doesn't really do that part so much anymore. Anyway, I have a video on the fact that I won one of these auctions from her, and then I show this like scrap bundle that she had sent, and within this scrap bundle was this dog fabric, and then in another video, following up on that video, I make a quilt out of this dog fabric. Anyway, so I have this dog quilt, and I really have no purpose for it. Like, I really like the quilt, and it has some interesting aspects. It has like some rickrack on it and things like that, but I don't have any interest in like keeping this quilt in my home and my life. Many of these quilts, if they don't sell, I'm really happy to have them for myself, for my family, to just keep them. That was not one of them. I really wanted to move that quilt. So I put that quilt and 2 other ones in a sale bin. I drastically lowered the prices on them. So I think I set that quilt price at $200. And then on top of slashing those prices, I wrote 50% off. So for that quilt, it was $200, 50% off for a total of $100, and that one sold. So as you know, $100 for a quilt, not great, but I was really happy for that sale for 2 reasons. One, I just wanted that quilt out and into the world. So that was great. And second, the sale, the little boy whose quilt it was going to be was there. So him and his mom, and his dad was there too, but the mom was the one who was primarily interacting with me and the son. But he was going from a little baby bed into a toddler bed and needed a new bedspread for his toddler bed. And so he was really excited about the quilt, and so it's going and it's being used. It's actually going to be on a bed, and the child is going to be under it and snuggling in it. So that is great, and I'm excited about that sale. So that was the other sale I had. over the festival weekend. So how much, so I sold one quilt for $220, one quilt for $100, and then a bunch of placemats for $55 for a set of 4, pillows for, I can't remember how much I priced the pillows at. I had largish ones that I think were priced at 60 for 2 or 80, no, it was 80 for 2 or something like that. I can't remember, but point being, I made almost $700 total. However, it was a $420 buy-in fee, so you can do the math on how much I made. And it was not really worthwhile, I would say, for the amount of work that goes into this festival. If I had spent that time focusing on my YouTube videos, I would have made far more on my YouTube videos than I would have at this artist market. So it's just something to keep in mind for the future for myself. Will I do that one again? Maybe. I really enjoy it. I like being surrounded by my quilts. I like putting the quilts up and in my little area, and you're just surrounded by all your work, and people come in and compliment and say how wonderful the quilts are, and you're just like surrounded by your work, and it feels really good. So I like doing it, kind of. The setup is time consuming and a pain. The takedown is time consuming and a lot of effort, and then you bring all the stuff home and it's a lot of stuff to put away. I might do a different artist market. There's a couple ones that I have in mind that I may do next year instead. I don't necessarily want to do more than one a year, but we'll see. I don't know. Let's take a look at this fish quilt. All right, here is this beauty, and I will preface this by saying that it is Halloween time, which is why there's like a skeleton back there, and then you may see some other Halloween decorations around. There's like a spider up in that corner up there. So if you're watching this in the future and you're wondering why there's these weird things in my house, that's the reason. So anyway, here is the fish quilt. I love this. Super excited about how this turned out. I love the sashing. They kind of come together in these arrows. And I didn't make up this sashing, so all of the quilts I make, they don't come from a pattern. I just kind of like make them up as I go. But I get inspiration from other videos and from quilt books and things like that. And this sashing I did not make up. This sashing came from a triple play video. The Missouri Star Quilt Company, once a month they come out with these triple play videos. You can go ahead and look them up on YouTube. They're great. And I'm trying to remember her name. Natalie, in one of the videos, I think it was the one themed around sashing, came up with this. And I think it is just genius. Good for you, Natalie. This is a genius sashing. Anyway, a lot of times you'll see this same sashing, but you'll see a 9 patch in here, but I've actually never seen it with this kind of hourglass arrow looking kind of thing. And then these little polka dots and whatever you call this, it all just comes together really well. And then for the quilting, I did quilt, you can see kind of along the circle here, and then obviously within the seams as well, like all the seams. It's pretty well quilted, this one. And these ended up looking like fish scales, I think. This kind of border here really works well. This was just like a tiny scrap that I had. I only had enough to do one along the top and the bottom. It's not on the left or right. And then the scales, these half square triangles that I think look like fish scales. And then this, have the stripe here. And of course, this awesome border along the whole thing. I bound it in the same fabric as this star fabric here. I always hand bind my quilts. Another bed-size quilt or a throw for the couch. I like my throws on the couch to be pretty large. I don't want like my feet to get sticking out of them. So I would actually put this on the couch. It's probably a similar size to that deer one that I have on the couch right now. Here is a little art quilt. As you know, I don't really make wall quilts. I make bed quilts for a whole variety of reasons. But I had a bunch of leftover pieces from a previous quilt that I had made. Actually, the one that I sold last year through Facebook was the original quilt, and then I had these pieces left over from that quilt. Now, all of this is pieced. There's no applique here, and I think it came together really well. The initial quilt didn't have any of this kind of checkerboard, but I needed more fabric to kind of fill the quilt out, otherwise it would have been pretty teeny tiny. So I got some of that, or actually had some of that on hand and used it. But I love this piece, and we have a gallery in town that is accepting submissions until like, I think October 31st, it's like super soon. And I might, even though it's not a quilt related gallery, it's like art, I think that this would be certainly appropriate to do an application for that. It's $35 to apply, and then there's up to $1,000 you can win for, I don't know, I've never done it or really looked into it, but you can win some money, and then your quilts, or not your quilts, but your art is for sale, so somebody could potentially buy it. So I may do that with this one. I don't know, I think it's pretty cool. I really like it. I kind of see it in like a New York City apartment or something like that. Here's the final quilt I have to show you today, and then we'll chat a little bit about upcoming projects, and I have a little fun story to tell you as well. This one was not for sale at the festival. This one I am making for a baby. I used a layer cake, so you can see the layer cake was composed of all these different tans and blues. It is called Lakeside Gatherings by Lisa Bonjean. I got it at the Fat Quarter Shop, and it was really, really fun to use. Now, you know, it had to be scrappy, that's the point, because it's a layer cake. It's only 10-inch squares, but it's 10-inch squares of all these different kinds of fabrics here. And it was a little bit of a challenge because some of them were much lighter and some of them were darker. But then obviously the borders here were yardage that I had. I didn't make these birds up. These birds are part of the pattern, but I don't know what the pattern is. I just basically saw an image of it and then just made it. So if you look up Bluebird Quilt pattern, I'm sure it will come up. I think it's a pretty popular one. So successful. Now, how do I feel about these like dark blue rectangles? I don't know. I mean, when I was first making it, I thought that it was kind of artistic and cool, but then I asked my husband what he thought about it, and he said he's very kind and he gives me a lot of good quilt advice, but he said it kind of looked like the birds were like running into a building. And then I was like, yeah, it does kind of look like the birds are running into a building, but I think it's okay. I think it kind of adds like this modern aspect to it. Like the bird blocks are more traditional, and then like the dark blue rectangles are a little bit more modern. I don't know, that's what I'm telling myself. Now in terms of the quilting, I obviously, as always, did the stitch in the seams, but in addition, I'm also doing, and I haven't finished yet, but as you can see, I'm doing this quilting with the pearl cotton thread. So I'm going in lines all across horizontally, the birds, and then for the blue part I'll do the same thing, but I'll do it vertically, and then I may do some hand stitching like along some of these lines because these are kind of big pieces, so I want to make sure that they're really tacked down. So I may do some lines here, and I may do a line here, and maybe one down here, but that's what I'm thinking for the quilting. So it's not quite done yet, but it's almost done, and I think I'm pretty happy with it. This part here is a little bit like, that's pretty light. So I don't know how I feel about that, but when you're working with a layer cake, you really only have so much to work with. So you gotta make do, which is, you know, kind of the traditional quilting way, isn't it? Okay, so those are the 4 quilts that I've recently completed. I have a couple other ones that are very close that just need to have their quilt sandwich made, but it's gonna be kind of like backed up because I have some other projects in the works that I will tell you about now. So after the artist market, a friend contacted me and said she had a friend and he was interested in buying a quilt. So I sent him an email. Long story short, he wants a quilt made specifically for him that involves his interests. So this is really right up my alley, but it's gonna be pretty time consuming. It's gonna be a long-term project, and he did give me permission to you know, video some of, you know, the creation of that quilt. I'm not sure how much I am going to do. I'll certainly show you maybe some of it, and then I'll definitely show you, you know, the end product. But that's one thing, and I have a couple sample blocks that I have to make and send him, or actually one in particular sample block to send him. But I got a little bit time delayed with that because I also got an email from a woman who had bought a set of 4 placemats at the artist market, and she was saying she wanted another 12 placemats. So she wanted another set of 3, but that they didn't have to be the same as the one she had, and that, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So basically I'm making more placemats anyway to replace the ones that I sold. So I told her that I would send her you know, a bunch of options. So right now I'm working on a bunch of options for her, and then when she picks which ones she wants, I'll go ahead and I'll make those placemats. So those are the 2 things that everything else is kind of getting put on the side, and I'm working, you know, with this woman on the placemats, and then I'm working with the gentleman on his quilt. And then once the placemats are done, and once I have a little bit of a handle on the commissioned quilt, I'll get back to some of these other projects. Because it's funny, the guy that I'm making the quilt for, he asked, you know, how many projects I have kind of ongoing at a time, and I said right now I thought I had about 3 or 4, and then I went and I really counted, not projects that I have like fabric set aside for to start, but projects that are actually started. Not UFOs. UFOs are, you know, I hate the term UFO. It makes absolutely no sense, but you know, all the quilt makers use it. The UFO is the unfinished objects, which I think that's the stupidest thing. I mean, they're projects that have kind of been temporarily abandoned is how I would describe it. Not UFOs, but projects that I'm actually working on right now. I went and counted, and I have between 8 and 9. So depending on how you count, because this quilt I'm making for the guy, I haven't actually physically started it yet. So that, in my mind, doesn't totally count. So if you don't count that, it's 8, and if you do count that, it's 9. Anyway, so that's what I'm working on now, and then I have a little story for you that's really fun for me and probably you don't care about whatsoever. I was recently, right before the artist festival, I was at my guild's quilt retreat. It's a 3 or 4 day, I think it's Thursday through Sunday retreat. So I was at that, and I have another quilt finished that I don't own it anymore. It's not in my possession. I didn't sell it. It was a donation quilt, but it's awesome. I will post pictures of it at the end of this video, and I'll tell you about it in just a second, because the whole retreat weekend, I was working on this particular quilt that I'll tell you about in a second, but that's not the funny story. So I was at the retreat. I was eating at a table with my quilting friends, and there was another quilt retreat going on at this same location. It's a pretty big location, so frequently there's multiple events happening at once. So there was this whole other quilt guild that was there. So I'm eating, this person from the other quilt guild comes up behind me and has a jacket, and she says, "Is this anybody's jacket? We're like gonna put it in the lost and found. Do you know if this is any of yours?" So I turned around and I look at the jacket, and I said, "No, it's not my jacket." And then the woman, she was like, "Do you have a YouTube video or a YouTube channel?" And I was like, "Yes." And she said, she watches my videos. She knows who I am. And I just thought that was amazing. I felt very cool around my quilty group that I was recognized. Her name is Mandy. Hi, Mandy. Totally a kindred spirit. She was so nice and wonderful. I just love her so much. So that was really fun. And then, interestingly enough, the very next weekend, I was at a quilt show with my other friend, and I ran into Mandy again. So really funny. She lives, I think, like an hour and a half, 20 minutes away from me. So she's not like local, but she's local-ish. So that was kind of funny. Let me tell you about this quilt that I made at my quilting retreat. I'll put a picture at the end of this video, but I also have pictures on my Instagram handle. In addition, on my Instagram handle, I also have pictures of the placemats that I'm creating. So a lot of the stuff that I work on, I don't necessarily have videos for, but I will post pictures and things like that on Instagram. So if you want to see that stuff, my Instagram handle is Mostly Quilts by Nora. You can see those placemats I'm working on now. You can also see this quilt that I'm about to tell you about that I'll put a picture up at the end of the video. It is a donation quilt for a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center. There's a new facility opening up in town. It's a drug and alcohol rehabilitation center, and they're gonna have 40 beds, which means that people can come and get the care that they need and stay overnight for sometimes a short period of time, sometimes a lengthy period of time. But the rooms were looking a little bit stark. And so the people who were, organizing this and putting it together reached out to the Quilt Guild and said, would you be interested in making some quilts? So I signed up to make one of these quilts. It's like 40 quilts for 40 beds or something like that. So I made one of them. I think it came out really well. I used flannel. This one is also flannel. I'm really into flannel lately. So this is flannel, and then the other one I made is also using blue flannel. It's kind of funny. I did some big stitch quilting on that one as well. So that's that. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.